Good day, my lovely students. Welcome back to our second video of the story, The Railway Children. Today we're going to tackle chapter 1. What we're going to learn today, or what we're going to discuss today, are some review questions to remember what you've prepared, the main events that happened in the chapter, the most important quotations, and the chapter in points with a character sketch. Let's start with the preview questions, and you should make sure that you've read and listened to the chapter carefully before starting. The first question says, where did the children live at first? Then, who do you think took the children's father away? The last one says, why do you think the children and their mother moved to a smaller house? If you've read and prepared well, you should know the answer for the 3 questions by now. If you don't, then you should read it and then complete the video with me. The first one, or the first chapter we have, is called How It All Began. Here, we learn about the children and how their life was going on before it all started. They lived happily in a big house with their mother and father who were able to afford a cook and a maid. So they were fairly rich, a little rich. And their father worked in a government office where he came home only on weekends. So the children didn't see him a lot of times, but still they had great bonds with him. And we know that when we learned that Peter's toy train broke down and blew up, and Peter asked father to mend it or repair it for him. Father apologized that he couldn't fix the train for him at the moment, but he would do that later when he was a little less busy. Later that evening, the family sat around the table eating their meal, and there was a knock on the door. The maid came in and said that there were 2 men inquiring and asking about father. Father went down to talk to them, and later they heard shouting and fighting. What was wrong? What do you think was wrong? We learned that when we hear the father coming into the dining room telling the children and their mother that he was going to go away for some time because there was a problem with the government. The children's mother tried to reassure them and tell them that nothing was wrong, and she didn't want to worry them. But for the next days, the children's mother would go out early in the morning and wouldn't come back until late in the evening. And she always looked ill and worried. They tried asking around the cook and the maid if they knew anything, but the cook and maid refused to tell them anything. And one day, mother came back and told the children that they would have to leave their big house in London and move to a cottage or a smaller house in the countryside. The children were excited. This was a very new experience to them. When the children saw the cottage for the first time, they were a little disappointed. They thought that the cottage was dirty and they didn't have water, and it was very different from their old city house in London. They thought they saw rats. So the children's mother tried to make them a little more comfortable or assure them that there weren't any rats. And she reminded them that they needed to eat, and they went on looking for food in the cellar with the boxes that came from their old house. They found some canned food and some jam and biscuits and tins of sardine, and then they were dusty and dirty, so they had to move on to wash under the pump in the yard because the house didn't have any water. They had great fun washing under the pump, and after the meal, they went to sleep. They went early to sleep, but mother stayed up late all night in order to prepare and unpack the boxes and put things away in the drawers and cupboards. For the next morning, the children woke up early, ready to explore. The first thing they wanted to explore was the garden of the house. Their house was up on a hill. That's why they wanted to go out and watch the view or the landscape from the hill. So when they went out, they felt the air was warm and they enjoyed it so much. And they had a little conversation between them. In this conversation, Phyllis suggested they help Mother around the house with the chores now that they couldn't afford a maid and a cook. Everyone agreed and they were cooperative and wanted to help their mother around the house however they could. After having that conversation, the children fell asleep in the warm sun. And then Mother came to wake them up and she had a surprise for them. She had found some food in the house that the lady from the village who helps around the house prepares for them. So when she found those the food, when she found the food, she called for the children to eat, and they ate that food for breakfast, and then they ran again to explore. But this time they wanted to explore the railway. Peter really wanted to see a train. That's the end of chapter 1. Okay? Now we move on to the most important quotations. Here in the first page we have a quote starting from line number 8 and ending with line number 12. So from lines 8 to 12, this paragraph talks about the children's life in the city, and they were happy and rich, but that was about to change. Their father was able to provide what they needed. In the next page, page 6, line number 2. Here, it talks about the train model or the toy train Peter received on his birthday. It showed how Peter was attached to the railway and how he adored playing with trains. In page number 6, lines number 5 and 6. This shows how busy Father was, but still could find time for his children and their needs. This tells us how kind and responsible Father was. Here's a hint about the number of the line. You can see small gray numbers on the left side of the page. 5, 10, 15, 20. That means line number 5 is marked for you. You can count beneath it for like 3 lines if it's 8, 4 if it's 9. That it goes that way, okay? So it's the same page, lines 16 and 17. And here we can see that the reason why Father left the house with the 2 men wasn't obvious for the children. But can you guess why Father was taken away? If you had a problem with the government, what would happen to you? You'd probably go to discuss with your teacher. I won't spoil it for you, but you probably have guessed it correctly. Let's move on. The last 2 lines of page 6, the first 2 lines of page 7, and starting from line number 6 until line number 9 in page 7, this is about Mother and how responsible and dedicated she was to the children and their needs. She was also so delicate in dealing with them, not letting them get worried or anxious about Father, and at the same time trying to provide solutions for their growing money problems. In page 7, lines number 10, 11, 12, and 13. So in these lines and lines number 17 and 18, the description of the cottage shows the gap between their old former life and the new one they were newly experiencing in the countryside. The house was totally different and they didn't have servants like before. They started realizing that they were becoming poor. Page 9, the first 4 lines, we're back to Mother again and how responsible and dedicated she was to making the cottage a comfortable place for the children. She stayed up all night unpacking and putting things away, and that shows how she is willing to sacrifice her rest in order to make the new house a good home for the children. In page 9, lines number 17 until line number 21. This shows how money problems didn't change the children from their supportive and loving nature. The youngest of them, Phyllis, was kind to think of her mother and how much help she needed around the house. Peter was eager to help but couldn't, so Roberta promised to look for a way for him to help. They all were cooperative and kind-hearted, and they all loved their mother and appreciated her sacrifices for them. In page 11, lines number 15 and 16, we're again back to Peter and how attached he was to the railway. It gives us a hint about how much the railway and its adventures would affect the children's lives and characters. Now that we're done with the quotes, we see the summary of the chapter. At the beginning, the children lived with their mother and father, and they were a little rich because their father worked in a government office. One day, the model railway engine that Peter received for his birthday blew up, so he asked father to fix it for him, but unfortunately, father couldn't. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door, and two men came to take father away because he had a problem with the government. The next week, the children rarely saw their mother, who looked ill and worried all the time. The children thought something was wrong, so they asked the servants, but nobody told them. A week later, their mother told them that they were going to move to a smaller house in the country without giving them any reasons. At first, the children were so excited, but when they arrived at the house, they lost all their excitement when they saw how small and dirty the cottage was compared to their old city house. For the first day, the children ate some canned food for dinner because there was no food and the cottage wasn't furnished and dirty. After getting their food from the cellar, they were dusty and dirty, so they had to wash under the pump in the yard because there was no water in the house. They had fun and went inside to eat, then fell asleep. Their mother stayed up all night that day, preparing the house and unpacking the boxes. The next day, the children woke up early, washed under the pump, and were ready to explore. The house was on top of a hill that led down to a railway line at the bottom. Roberta suggested they explore the garden. They sat in the garden because the weather was warm, and they started talking, and Phyllis said that since they didn't have any more servants, they should start helping their mother with the chores. They all agreed, and soon after, they all fell asleep. Mother came later to wake them up with a surprise. She had found a new small room in the house that had some food prepared. They ate the food as breakfast and told their mother that they were going to explore the railway. And that's the end of our summary, and now we move on to the last part of the video, the chapter in points. The children were ordinary and lived a normal life with their rich parents. Their father was taken away by the government, and mother here showed us how devoted and giving she was. Their old house was luxurious, so when they saw the cottage, they were a little disappointed as it was the total opposite of their old house. The changing circumstances didn't change the children's kind hearts, and they were very eager to help their mother around the cottage now that they had no more servants. The children were so interested in the railway and exploring it, and that shows how the adventures would change them later on as they got older. And that's the end of chapter 1. I hope it was easy for you. Thank you for watching and listening, and goodbye!